Hello artist, Mrs. Larrabee here. This week we're looking at texture. Texture is the way something feels. In artwork you can have literal texture, as in maybe a sculpture or even a painting that has some kind of relief to it, something that stands out from the canvas. They can actually feel a certain way. In two-dimensional artwork, when we're working on canvas or on paper, texture is just something that looks like it has a feeling to it. Today we're going to explore how to use texture with our oil pastels and with our watercolors to create these really cute owls. Alright, so the things you're going to need: watercolor, either oil pastels or crayons. If you just have a Sharpie, that's fine too. You're going to need your water and your paintbrush and a piece of paper. We'll get started. Okay, first things first, we're going to draw. I'm going to take a black oil pastel. Again, if you have crayon, that would be fine. Oil pastel and crayon just resist the watercolor, which works kind of nicely for what we're doing today, but you could also use a Sharpie. We're going to start with the eyes on our owl. So the first part's drawing. We're going to go kind of big, kind of these big ovals on our paper. All right, so this is the iris, the colorful part of the eye. Let's add the pupil, or the black part of the eye. The larger the pupil, the more friendly something's going to look, and the smaller the pupil, the more suspicious something might look. So you can decide how you want your owl to be by how big you make this black part. It's also nice to leave a little white space that shows the reflection. This serves two purposes. One, it makes it look a little more realistic to have that reflection of the light like we naturally would see on the eye. It also shows texture. The eyes are going to be smooth, and when you see that light reflecting off the eye, it shows the texture of the eye is smooth. I'm going to go ahead and color this in with my oil pastel. You can also do it with watercolor in a little while if you would like. So the eye is going to be smooth, and the beak as well. The beak's kind of the same shape, maybe a little more pointed on the end. And you could also do the same and leave a little reflection spot there. I'm actually going to watercolor my beak in, so I won't color it in with my oil pastel. Whoops, it broke. We're going to go back all over these black lines with our watercolor as well. So we'll be able to fill in all the little spots. There we go. All right, next we want to add some feathers. Okay, let's think for a minute. Owls generally have this nice curved look around their eyes. They have long feathers that are kind of wispy, and then the closer you get to their eyes, they have these little short feathers. So think for a moment about how you could use line to create these long feathers. I'm going to do something kind of like this. So these long lines, but they're curved instead of straight. If we have straight lines, they might feel a little more jagged and rough. But if we have long kind of curved lines, we're going to get a little more of that feeling of soft and smooth. Let's add the same to the other side. All right. So owls also have these smaller feathers, and they're generally kind of located around the face. So for these, I'm going to do some smaller curved lines. I still want them to look soft, but I definitely want them to look like a different texture than the ones on the outside, because they are a different texture. Even though they're soft, they're a smaller soft. Maybe not as soft as the outside. All right. And I might add some tiny little lines just around here. And that's about all I'm going to do with the drawing part. So we're ready to go to watercolor now. I have my watercolors here. They have not been used yet, so I'm going to drip a little water on them to wake them up. So think for a moment about color theory. We've talked maybe in other lessons about how warm colors blend together really well, and cool colors blend together really well. Warm colors are colors that remind you of the fire or sun. Cool colors are colors that remind you of the rainforest. This is actually a dark purple. This is a bright pink over here. So when I'm thinking about working in sections, I'm probably going to stick to warm colors or cool colors depending on where I am. Here's kind of how that looks for me, because I know that they're going to blend together well and not turn that muddy brown. So I'm going to choose for my background to have a cool color. So when we're working with watercolor and when we're working with texture, we might find ourselves working in layers. I like to look in layers. Layer 1, I just want to get a color all over the sections of my paper. I want to make sure that I have color everywhere that I need it to be. You might think of this as a little bit of your background color. We're not adding in our details yet. That's going to be our last thing with watercolors today. So think about what you want your main background color to be. And just go ahead and fill in this section. So you're going to fill in all around the face, and we're also going to fill in the background for our feathers out here. I'm going to skip to warm colors when I get out here. So I'm going to go with this kind of bright pinky magenta color. And you don't have to stay inside any certain lines that you've drawn. It's up to you. If I grabbed a little red, that's okay. They're going to blend together nicely because they're friends. They're side by side on the color wheel. We're going to go ahead and we're going to fill in all these places. Keep grabbing red by mistake. All these places with our background color. This is our first layer of color. All right, everything has its first layer of color. It's starting to dry just a little, which is good. We're going to add a second layer of color. So we're going to start adding a little bit more of these details. So around the eyes, that was the last thing that I added. I'm going to go ahead and start there. I want these colors to blend well, so I'm going to add just a little of a darker color around the edges. I'm going to let these colors overlap and bump into each other. This is a technique called bleeding in artwork. It allows two wet colors to kind of meld with each other. I want these colors to blend. I don't want them to stand out too much. Again, we're creating a smooth texture. We can do that with watercolor by letting our colors blend and not be too bold with each other. So I'm going to go back. I've just washed my brush and all I have on it are water. I'm going to go back now and just blend these two colors together. I'm just kind of going over the outside. I feel like I kind of got rid of a little too much yellow, so I could add a little more yellow on top. So we're creating a smooth texture by keeping our watercolors smooth. All right, so that's smooth for the eyes. Also here for the beak, I'm going to go back in with a little darker now that that first layer's dried some. I'm going to go around the edge with the dark, but again, I'm going to keep it smooth so that I can have this idea of a smooth, shiny texture. But now we're ready for the feathers. The feathers are going to be kind of wispy and they're going to have a little bit of a feel to them. I'm going to go back in. This time I'm going to purposefully grab my red. I'm going to keep using these curved lines, but I'm going to make them a little more defined now. I'm adding a second layer of color on top of that first. And again, because they're both warm colors, they're side by side on the color wheel too. That means that I'm going to be able to blend these colors. They're going to look nice together. I don't have to worry about them turning brown. And then I think I'll come back over that too. And I'm going to add a little bit of orange too. That orange really just stands out so neat with those other warm colors. Oops. You could try some yellow on there, but I think that might start to get it just a little muddy. All right, so that's kind of the idea. I would go all the way around with these warm colors. On top of here, I'm going to go back with cool colors, and I'm going to add some short strokes. I'm going to take a darker blue this time. I'm going to kind of mimic these shorter, smaller feathers that aren't completely straight, and they're not, you know, unsoft, but they're not as soft and luxurious as those big feathers are. They're going to have a different texture to them. So I'm adding these little lines in here. I'll also do it down here around the eyes. Add the second layer of texture around the eyes, kind of emphasize, and look, it's kind of starting to look even more like an owl We're getting a little more of those details added in. Kind of let these taper off over here, I think. And I might even come back with this really dark purple. This one's kind of starting to bleed up here. My watercolor's a little wet, but down here it was more dry. I can add a little bit more of this dark purple over, and it's just adding a little more detail to it. So I might want to let this dry a little and come over it again. So I'll go over my whole piece of artwork with these bright colors on the outside and layering these darker colors on the inside. All right, so we have the color kind of laid in now. You can see some spots are still pretty wet, and so the color didn't stay really dark. So this is one of those pieces of artwork that you have to let sit for just a minute and then come back and add another layer, but I think we're ready. So we added our first layer, we added our wash in the background of all these different colors. We added our second layer, which was to come back and add some of these details, layer our colors, and start to get a little bit more of that texture feel. This time, our last layer is going to be doing a little outlining and defining. For this, I'm going to use black. I don't keep black in my color palette just because it's so powerful and it's not needed for every time I watercolor. I keep it separate. So I'm going to use a little black over here. I'm going to go just right over the top of this oil pastel, and it won't stick to the oil pastel. You'll notice that it's kind of beating up on top. If you're using crayon, it'll be the same, but it's going to fill in all those little gaps and make it look a little more solid. Again, we're going for a smooth texture, so anything we can do to make it look solid and smooth is going to add to that feeling of smooth texture. And then I like to go around the edges of all my pastel for that same reason. Pastel kind of leaves a little white space when you use it, so this just kind of fills it in and makes it a little more solid, kind of gives it a finishing touch. Not every artwork you're going to want to outline in black, but if you ever feel like you're working on something and it just doesn't look quite finished, sometimes a black outline is the only thing you need to make it just have that last little bit of finished look. All right, so I'm not using a lot of water. This is really important with watercolor to control the amount of water you have. If I were using a lot of water, it would just bleed out and meld with all my watercolor. So either you want to let it dry completely before you do this, or get your black watercolor damp, but then don't use any more water on it. Not only here, but you might also want to go back in here and add a little outline with your black. Just kind of gives it a little bit more of that finished look. It bolds the colors just a little. It's interesting how adding this black line makes the other colors look brighter. So adding this darkness for it to contrast with is actually causing my reds and my oranges to stand out even more. So we added our 3 layer of colors, we used our line, and we used our watercolor to show shape, or to show texture, and shape, using shapes to show texture. We added a little white highlight in there. All right, and now all we got to do is let it dry now. Thank you so much for doing art with me. I hope you have a great day.